Uh, yes, I think we're live. Hi everyone, and welcome to another lecture. So today we'll be learning about states and props in React.js and also about event handling. Now, let me start by introducing myself quickly. I'm Soham Mukherjee. I'm a software developer. Currently, I'm working with Google as a software development engineer, and before that, I worked with CodeNation for 1 year as an SD. Now, I've been into ICBC regionals 2 times, 2017 and 19. I'm also a 6-star coder at CodeShare. What will I be teaching you here? I'll be teaching you about web backend, React.js, system design, cloud services, and data structures and algorithms. Now, if you're planning to take the Relevel test, you can use my referral code SOHAM10 and you will get a free sample test paper. Coming to Relevel, what Relevel exactly is? So many a times candidates face problem like they don't have proper network, or they don't have proper degree that's needed for certain jobs, or they don't have proper resumes that will help them get a job. Like they're applying for hundreds of companies but they're not reverting back, right? So if you're such a candidate and you are facing these problems, then Relevel is the perfect solution for you. What is Relevel? Relevel is India's first test hiring platform by Unacademy that will help you find job. Now you can get the job based on your talent and skills and not based on what degree you have, what network connections you have, and these things. What are the benefits of participating in the D-level test? There are over 50 plus companies, including top startups and unicorns, who are hiring through D-level. There are over 1,000 plus job openings across the domain: business development, front-end development, and back-end development. You might think that it might be costly or it might take a lot of time to complete and these things, but it's completely free for you, and you can complete all the rounds of the test within one single day. And the scores will also be shared to you within a week, so it's not time consuming, neither it's costly, like it's completely free for you. And the best part is that the scores will also be shared with the companies, so the companies will be approaching to you based on your performance, and you don't have to have proper prior connections, or you don't have to have great resumes and these things, right? So registration with Relevel, it's pretty simple. You can go to the website and you can click on get hired, and after that you can select a test of your choice. Let's say you want to become a front-end developer. Like after we are done with this React course, maybe you are confident that you want to become a front-end developer, so you can click on front-end development test, and after that you select select a slot for your test. Now let's now keep two things in mind that firstly, there will be multiple rounds of the test that you have to complete within a single day. So make sure you are available for the entire day. And secondly, make sure to book the slots fast because the number of slots are limited, right? So after you are done selecting a slot for yourself, enter the details, like enter your full name, email ID, and these things. Now there is a section to enter referral code. You can use my referral code SOHAM10 and you will get a free sample test paper. Now after that, you can after you proceed, you will go to the dashboard where you will get all the details for your test. Now there you will get a practice section. If you have used my referral code in the previous step, which is also for free, you will get a free sample test paper from this page, and you can download it and check what type of questions might be coming in. So make sure you practice and register with Relevel today. The link is in the description below, and if you haven't joined us on Telegram channel yet, make sure you join us there because you'll be notified about whenever I'm coming live, what is the agenda for that day and these things. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified about whenever I'm coming live. Also, if you're liking the videos, make sure you like them, and also please share them with your friends as well, so that they can also learn, and then you can collaborate and do some like some projects on your within yourselves. So that will be beneficial for you as well, right? And it will help me to reach a larger audience as well. So just do that, and with that we'll be starting the agenda for the day. But before that, let me know if you have any questions for me. Let me know if you have any questions for me. We'll be waiting for the others to join in. Like I think some more of you might join in actually, but yeah, like just let me know. Let's quickly recapitulate whatever we have done. So we have talked about virtual DOM, like what is the advantage of virtual DOM, what virtual DOM is, and why is it important. We have also talked about JSX, what are some notable differences between HTML that we write and JSX, because JSX might seem very similar to HTML, and that's actually good because we know already how to write in HTML, so we can quickly build web pages without learning a lot of things. But there are some notable differences between JSX and HTML as well. Definitely we'll explore them more as we go, like as we do more things we'll explore more about of these differences. But some of the differences that we can see from the top is everything will be in camel case. class is changed to class name, style will be object. So these things, right? And all the properties of the style should be in camel case as well. After that, we talked about components. We have also talked about what are functional components, what are class-based components, how do we create them. So here we have created two components, greet user, that just that is a functional component. So in a functional component, we just write a function and followed by the name of the function. So we generally, for components, we follow the camel case convention. No, it's not camel case, it's Pascal case, sorry. We follow the Pascal case convention, where we, because normal HTML tags are in small letters, so we use the Pascal case convention, and it returns it should return some JSX, any functional component, or indeed any component should return some JSX. And after that, we can do two types of export. One is default export, one is named export. So that is how we create a functional component, and we saw it's pretty simple to create one. We also looked into how to create class-based components. So for class-based component, any component should actually override this react.component base class, and there are methods that it has to override. One of them is the render method, which is one of the most important methods. In the render method, it actually should return what is this component, the JSX for this component, basically what this component stands for. So it returns the JSX here under the render method. And here we have used default named exports. As we have multiple exports here, so we have used named exports, and we can import them like this under using bases, right? So we can just import them like this. So that is what we have done till now. Let me know if you have any doubts, otherwise we can proceed with the class for the day. Okay. I don't think anyone else is joining in, so let's just continue maybe. And if they are joining in, we can just we can just look into that later. Okay, so we have created components, right? We have learned how to create components. The next thing that we'll look into is very important concept, which is called states, right? What states are, right? Before we dive into what states are or how do we create states, React, there is actually there's a saying that React reacts to state changes. So basically, whenever the state is changing, React will react to it. How will it react to it? It will re-render itself. Whenever state changes, it will just re-render itself, right? The components will re-render itself. Okay, so what is state, right? Let's say we are creating a, but before we start with state, right? Before we start with state, let's talk a bit about event listeners. So we already know from JavaScript what event listeners are. What are event listeners? Whenever you are doing some event, they will be listening to that event, right? Whenever you are doing some event, let's say you are clicking a button, you should have a way that you can convey that this button is clicked, and you should have some code that should be executed. You might want to have some code that will be executed whenever the button is clicked. So you will have event listeners in place. So whenever the event is triggered, the listeners will be listening to it, and whatever you have, like whatever function you pass, that function will get executed whenever the event is happening. Let's say the button is clicked, so you can have a event listener called button click or on button click or something like that, that will basically listen to button clicks, right? Whenever the button is clicked, it will just fire the function that you have passed in. Let's say you want to do something, it will just fire that function. We'll take an example here. So what we'll do is, let's remove these greet users maybe for now. We maybe just keep one of them, right? Maybe we'll just want to keep one of them. What I'll do here is I'll just make a functional component, let's say, or I can create a component here only, not a component but a button. I just want to create a button here. Let's say let's create a button here, right? Button, and let's say I'll add some text here, click me. So if I run this button and click me, let's see how it looks. So there's a button, right? Let's give it some styles maybe. Let's maybe give it some styles. So what we'll do is we'll give it a class name equals to primary button maybe, or let's give it a class of btn button, right? So we can have some styles written here. So dot btn, maybe width will be, let's say, somewhere around 100 pixels. If we write this, let's see how it looks. Okay, it has grown a bit. Or let's just maybe modify the font size. So font size will be let's say 1.2 RDM. So let's see if this, yes, that has increased the size. And let's give it some more properties, like let's say background color will be something like, let's say blue. sorry, blue, or let's give it a red or something like that. Magenta is there, or not magenta. Red is okay, maybe red. Okay, so we have a button, we have a red button that has the text click me, right? Maybe we can change the color to white. Okay, we can change the color to white. Okay, maybe we can increase the size of the button a bit, so we'll just increase the text size to 2 rem, and let's just increase the size of the button a bit. Okay, we have this button click me, right? So we have this button click me. If you see, you're clicking, nothing happens right now. Now you want some code to be executed whenever this button is clicked, right? How can we do this? That's the agenda. So whenever this button is clicked, I want some code to be executed. What I can do is I can add an event listener to it. How do I add an event listener to it? There's the event listener called on click. So we can add this on. If you see, there are multiple event listeners here, like on abort, on animation end, on aux click capture, on blur capture, on can play, these things, right? So there are multiple of them. What we want is on click. So any component, rather any HTML element or any component also will have these attributes called on click and these things. So whenever those HTML element, you don't need to actually have a button. You can just have a span as well, or you can have a h1 tag as well. If you add an event listener, let's say on click, whenever you click on that code will be fired. So what will this contain? This will contain some function that should be executed, right? This will contain some function that should be executed. So we can write the function here as well, like this, that let's write it here, const handle click. So we'll create an arrow function here, handle click. Let's take that like this. So we create an arrow function here, const handle click. What we want to do is, let's say we want to do a window.alert. We want to create a window.alert with button is clicked. Button is clicked. We just want to do this window.alert button is clicked. So we can pass this function here. We can pass this function here, the function reference here, that on click you should call this function handle click, right? It is responsible for calling this function. You will not call this function. You will just pass the function reference that on click you should call this function, and it is responsible for calling this function. You don't have to call this. Just remember, like, you should not do like this. You should not do like this. If you do like this, that will actually cause error, right? That will not cause error. I'll show what that will cause, but you should not do like this. What you should do is pass the reference here. Now just let's reload this. Okay, let's click this now and see, and it gives the window.alert that button is clicked, right? What if you actually call this function? Let's say you do like this. What will happen then? Just save this, and whenever you open this will be triggered, right? It will always be there. That is because you are actually calling it here only. You are not making it trigger. You are not calling this when the button click is triggered. So to have that, you should just pass the function reference here, that handle click is the function that needs to be called whenever you click the button. You just pass the button reference, you don't call this, right? So see, this is working, right? This is working. One second. Yes. So this is basically working. Other way you can do, like, you might not want to have this is a small code, right? You might not want to have it here. What you can do is you can indeed have it inline as well. How? Let's see how we can have this inline. So we can just have this inline as well, like this. We can just create arrow function here like this, and not only arrow, a normal function as well will work, but we'll just use arrow functions, right? So window.alert button is clicked. So you can just create arrow function here like this, and that will pass the reference to this function, and whenever you basically click this button, you will see that button is clicked. So this is also working. Let's just change the text. Maybe button is clicked inside inline. So let's just change the text to button is clicked inline. We'll just save this, and whenever we click on this, see, button is clicked inline, we are getting this text, right? So that is basically event listener. So, like, it need not be a button, right? You can, in fact, let's say greet user, right? Whenever you click on greet user, you want something to be happening, right? So let's go to greet user code. So this is the greet user code, right? So you can add a on click event to this h1 as well, on click, right? On click. What you need to do, let's say we want to do a window.alert and click h1 tag. let's say clicked h1 tag is the code that I want to execute. So if you just click on this, right, if you just click on this, it will give you clicked h1 tag. However, see the cursor, right, see the cursor, it is not normal cursor, right, not a cursor that actually helps you click, or that's like a clickable cursor. Clickable cursors are like this, or like a pointer. So that's because of the pointer properties. You can just change the pointer properties for this. Let's say style pointer, maybe point cursor is pointer, I believe. Cursor property, let's just change it to pointer. Let's see if this works. So if you go here, now see it's a pointer, right? So you can, that means it is clickable, right? So whenever you make something clickable, make sure you change this cursor property as well, so that people understand that it is clickable, right? So that's how you can add a on click event. Similar to on click event, we have other event listeners as well. Let's say there's the input, right? There's the input. So let's give input here and see there's the input, right? Now what you want to do is you want to do something whenever this input is changed, right? The value is changed. So you can pass an event listener called on change, and here you will get an event. What you can do here is console.log. Let's log to our console that what is the value right now. So event.target.value. You have this event.target.value, so you can log this to your console. So it should log to the console whenever the value is changed. So let's just inspect this for now. We'll go to the console. Let's see what happens. So let's write hello. See, it's triggering this. It's calling the onChange event listener, and it's calling the function. And in the function, we see that we have written console.log event.target.value, right? We have written this thing. So that's why it is logging into the console whenever we change the value here. So let's say you just remove something, that will also work, right? See that it's still calling. So basically this is what event listeners are. Let me know if you have any doubts. So there are multiple of them, right? There are multiple of them, like there's on click, there's on change, there's on animation end, on animation start, on mouse over, on mouse, like your mouse is entering some element, right? So on mouse over, like those things are also there. So you can read more about the event listeners that you can use. Most cases we just use these things, but again, like whenever you are creating a web application where there is a lot of functionality, like let's say the sidebar should appear whenever you hover, right? Something like that. So in those cases you might want to use the other things like on mouse over, on mouse down, like these things. Or you want to do something on when keyboard key is pressed, right? So that time you should listen to events like on key press or something like that. Let me know if you have any doubts with this, any doubts that you have here, or we can continue. Anything that you didn't understand, let me know. I'll definitely try to help. But if you understood, then also let me know, like then we can proceed to the next part. Did you understand about what event listeners are, or what are they used for? No doubt. Okay, cool. Awesome. So let's move ahead. So we have learned about event listeners. Now let's say we want to create an application, right? We want to create an application. What do we want to create? Let's say we just want to create a simple counter application, right? We just want to create a simple counter application where you have you have two buttons, add and subtract. There's a counter. The counter is incremented whenever you click on add, and the counter is decremented whenever you click on subtract. So let's create that application, right? Like what I'm talking about here is you have a counter written, like let's say the value is 0, counter is 0. You have a button add 1. So whenever you click on that, the counter value becomes 1. Whenever you click on remove subtract 1, so whenever you click on that, the counter value reduces by 1 and the updated value is presented to you. So let's create that application. So what we'll do is maybe we can just delete these codes that we have, move to recycle bin, and maybe move to recycle bin. Yes. So let's just remove this for now. We will not use this. Okay. So let's have this for now. Style. Okay. What we'll do is we'll create a new component called counter component, right? So let's create a new file called counter component, counter.js, right? So we'll create a function as a component. But before that, let's start with the class-based component to understand better. So for class-based component, how do we create one? So import React from React, right? And class counter extends what? React dot component. It should extend React dot component, and it should call the render method. It should call the render method, right? Okay, and the render method should return something. So it should have a return statement like this, return. Okay, so this let's just return something here, span from, just return a span here from, miss for now just return a span that let's say hello from counter, something, right? Hello from counter. Let's just maybe like just render this, and then we'll start with building the application. So we'll import this, import counter from dot slash component slash counter, and we'll just render this here, that counter should come here, and that should be it. So let's see if this is giving. Okay, it's not exported, so we should export here as well. Export default. In fact, we can export it from here as well, like this. Export default like this as well, right? We can export from here as well, or we can write a separate statement for this as well. So hello from counter, we are getting hello from counter for now. Okay, let's look into the code now. What we want to do is we want to have a value, have a variable that whose value is changing, right? We want to have a variable whose value is changing. Whenever we want to have such variables whose value is changing, and that value should be like updating that value should be updated on the user interface as well, we should always have something called states, right? We should always have something called states. What does state do? State basically are responsible for containing those values, and whenever the state value changes, the React will render itself. React will re-render the component, right? So how do we create states in class-based component? We have the constructor, right? Constructor, and we take the props here, and we call the super class here with the props. Now here we specify the state like an object, right? This dot state equals to like this. And here, what is the state that we want to have? The counter, right? Initially, it should be 0. So we give the initial value like this, 0. This dot state counter is 0. So now, what I want to do here, we want to display this counter application, right? So we want to have a div tag here, div, and this, let's give it some style here. Style will be display flex, and flex direction will be column. Flex direction will be column, right? Let's have this here, h1, the value of the counter value is counter colon. Now we want to specify the value of the counter here, right? We want to specify the value of the counter here, so that's a variable. So we'll use the braces here. How do we get the value of the counter? This dot state dot counter, this dot state dot counter. This is how we get the value of the counter. This dot state dot counter, right? Now let's actually see what's happening here. So if you see, counter is 0 initially, right? Counter is 0 initially. What we want to do is we want to add 2 buttons that will basically increase the value of this counter and decrease the value of this counter, right? So that's what we want to do. So we will add a button here, right? Let's just add a button here. Let's just add a button here that hey, this is a button. What it should do, let's give it a message like add 1, right? So let's see if the button is rendered correctly. So we have this button here with add 1, right? We can even give it a class name called btn1. So class name is btn1 or btn, right? So we'll get the button like this, add 1. We have this button, but now nothing happens, right? We are clicking on this, nothing actually happens. What we want to do this is we want to change the value for this. So definitely on click we want to do something. So what should we do? We should add an event listener. So we should add an event listener on click. It should be a function. What should it do? It should update the value of the state. Now what basically we can do is you can tell we can do something like this, right? This dot state dot counter plus equals to 1, but we do not do it like this. Whenever we do not do it like this. We do not update the state like this. What we do is there is a method called set state, right? So this dot set state, we update the value This is not a synchronous process, right? This is not something synchronously that should happen synchronously, because when the state is changing, it should also update the DOM. So this should not be a synchronous thing. So what do? We call this set state method, and in this we pass the new value of the state. So we pass the new value of the state, that is this dot state, and this basically what this will do, we are spreading on this dot state, right? We are spreading on this dot state. Basically whatever other properties that are there, they will be copied as is, and only the counter will be replaced to this dot state dot counter plus 1. This is how we change the state. We use the this dot set state method to change the state. We do, and in that this dot set state we will pass the new value of the state, whatever. In fact, we do not need to pass this as well. We can just pass whatever is changing, and that will also work, right? We just pass whatever is changing and that will work. So we just set the counter to +1, right? We just set the counter, we want to update the counter to +1. So we just set this dot state dot counter +1, right? Now if I add this, see, counter is updating, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, like this. So that is basically a state. If you have a normal variable, let's say I have a normal variable, let's call it let sum, let val equals to 0, and if I do this same logic like this, instead of using a state, right, instead of using a state, I do it like this, val, and I just do here, instead of doing a set state, let's do set state, but again val plus equals to 1. If we do it like this, right, if we do it like this, this will not work. Just see what will happen. Counter 0, if you add 1, nothing actually happens. That is because React will not react, it will not re-render this component again whenever the value is changing. What we should do, we should re-render, right? Because the value of this counter is changing, we should render it again, but React will not do that like this. To make it react to this value change, we have to use state. So that's why we can use this, instead of this like variables like this, we can use this dot state dot counter, right? And like we can use the set state like this with the updated value, like we in this set state we pass in the updated value for the state, that is counter should be this dot state, the current value +1. So now if you just add 1, this will work. Yes, state will always be defined in the constructor for a class component, right? It will always be defined like this. This dot state will be an object, it will contain the initial values like this. Let's say we want to do subtract 1. I think it's pretty simple now, like you can easily do. Let's just copy this because it will be a copy of this. So subtract 1, let's call this subtract 1, right? Subtract 1, and in this what you want to do, you want to just do a -1 instead of a +1, right? So let's see if this works. So we have subtract 1, so we can add, we can subtract, we can add, we can subtract, right? Add and subtract. So that's about state, what state is, right? So if you want to have, let's think about this. If you want to have a cart component, and in the that cart component is dynamic, like you can add to the cart, you can delete from the cart. So how should you actually have that cart component? You should have the cart values as a state, right? So whenever the cart values are changing, if something is added to the cart, it is automatically, the state should be updated, so automatically the user interface will also be updated. So that is basically declarative programming. You are just telling what to do, you are just updating the value of the state. It takes care how it should update the state. You don't have to worry about how to update the state, right? So that's about what like states. Let's see how we can create state in a functional component. So let's close this. We'll create a state in a functional component. So let's call it counter. Sorry, I'll just delete this. Let me know if you have any doubts here. I'll definitely try to help you out. So counter function, let's call it, sorry, counter functional. This is, anyways, I'm not spending much time on the class based view, because class based declaration, because will not be using class based declaration that much. That is just for your understanding how does a state work, or how is the state defined, right? But we'll be spending more time with a functional component. Okay, so to define a state in a functional component, see, functional component, it's a functional component, right? So it will not have it will have this keyword, but this will point to the window. So it doesn't have this state like this. You cannot have a like, it is not, it is getting this state property or this state functionality because it is extending the React.component, right? So that's why it has this state functionality. How can we have the same thing in a class based in a functional component, right? We cannot have a constructor like this, right? We cannot have a constructor like this. So how will we have this? We use something called hooks. So whatever is there for the class based component, if you want to have similar functionality for functional components, right, we have to use something called hooks. What are hooks? Hooks are some methods that will actually hook to the code of React. Like, what is the code of React? It contains state, it contains lifecycle methods. So hooks will actually hook into these things. It will provide you with state in a functional component. There is a hook that will provide you lifecycle methods in a functional component. So that's basically what hooks are, right? So there is a hook for state. We need a hook. The hook name is useState, right? So let's import that. So import useState, and it is in React. Okay, it is in React, the same place where this is there, React.component is there. The same place where you get React.component, in the same place you will get the useState hook. That will basically give you the state functionality in a functional component. Okay, now we'll create a functional component, function counter function. Now here counter function, here you will actually come across all the things that we have learned in ES6, right? Now one by one they will make sense. Why do we learn those things, right? Export default counter functional. Let's export this. We want the state, right? We want the state. How do we get that? We use the useState hook like this, useState, and we pass an initial value that is 0. We pass an initial value that is 0 for our counter. Like, let's say it is a string, so you will pass an initial value for a string, empty string maybe. So this will determine what is the type of the state. Now what does this return? This returns an array of 2 items. It will return an array of 2 items. First, it will return the state. Second, it will return a setter method for the state, similar to this dot set state, right? You would need a setter method, so it will return a setter method for your state. So let's take that. So const, it returns an array of 2 items. How do we take an array of 2 items? Like, how do we actually take each items in individual variables? We use something called destructuring. We have learned about destructuring already. So first will be the counter, the state counter. Second is set counter. Set counter, it is the setter method for the counter. So we destructure these two values out, right? Now return, what will it return? Div. Let's just copy this code maybe a bit. Okay, we'll just have this same thing. Div. Let's have this. Now here we have copied the same code. Here we'll have h1. So h1 counter, instead of this.state.counter, we can just write the variable name counter, right? Now counter is treated similar to a variable. We have this counter, it is treated similar to the variable. If you want to update the counter, how you should do is you should use the set counter method. Set counter with the new value of the counter, that is counter plus 1, right? Similarly here also you should use the set counter method to set the state. So set counter, and that will be counter minus 1, right? Okay, so we have this. Now we'll use this, but before that I'll give a margin top and bottom to this. So margin top will be 10 20 pixel, margin bottom will be 20 pixel, let's say. Okay, so let's use this instead of our class component. So import counter functional, right? We'll import counter functional and we'll use this now instead of our class component. So counter functional. Now if you see here, what will happen? The same thing, we have the same thing. Maybe we can give some other thing, like we can make this a bit different, like functional. Let's say let's give it a message called functional counter and add 1 and subtract 1. So see, functional counter, add 1, subtract 1. So definitely it's coming to this part, right? The counter functional component. Now let's see if we can actually change the value. So if we add, it's indeed changing. If we subtract, it's indeed changing, right? So that's how you can actually create a state in a functional component. Where is set counter defined? Whenever you use this hook, right, use state, it will return an array of two items. The first is the state itself, which you can store in a variable. The second will be a setter method for that state, like set counter. Set counter is some name that we are giving, right? Just remember destructuring. What did we do? Like if it returns an array of two items, we want to destructure them out. So basically what we are doing here is, let's say it returns an array. Let me write it here. What we are basically doing is const response equals to useState 0, and then we are doing like this, const counter equals to response of 0, const set counter is equals to response of 1. So this is what exactly we are doing. This entire code can be written in a single line using destructuring, right? Like this. So set counter is returned by useState. It will return a counter, the state itself, and it will return a setter method for the state. Okay. Let's say we don't want to have a counter application. Okay. We don't want to have a counter application. What we want to have here instead is we want to type in some name, right? We want to type in some name. So let's just remove this. Let's have this, but let's remove this part. Okay, we just want to type in some name, and whatever name we type in, it is displayed, right? We want to have an input and some name. So what we want to have here is h1 name is, and then the name will come in, and then we will want to have an input where if we type some name, it will enter the, like, let's say we have something like this. If I type here Soham, the name Soham should come here. Why is state constant? That's because we are not directly changing the value, right? When is it not constant? When we do not change the value. When we okay, when is it not constant? When we actually do not we do something like this. Like if we do something like this, counter plus equals to 1. In that case, it is not constant. But we are not actually changing the value directly. We are using the setter value to set the value, right? So it's actually every time we set the value, it updates definitely, but that is updated, like it's not because of the constant that we have taken, but it will again get the value. It will create a new variable with the same value, right? It will re-render everything. Re-render means this will again call this entire thing, this function, entire functional component will be called again, right? So this entire thing will be called again with the new values. So it's actually constant for the current invocation. If you look into it carefully, it's actually constant for the current invocation. For whenever it changes, again this entire functional component is re-rendered, so we get the new value altogether, right? We get the new value altogether. This can be actually understood better. Let's give a console.log, right? Console.log, and let's maybe okay, I'll do that later, but first of all, let's actually think about this. We have an input statement here. Whatever we want to type here, that should be reflected here as well. Whatever we type here, that should be reflected here as well. So what we'll take the name as a state, and set name will be the setter method, right? So we'll use this use state. Now what is the type? It is a string, right? So we'll pass in an empty string maybe initially, and name is, you can give it name. Let's say the initial name we want to have is dummy. The initial name that you want to have is dummy, so you can pass dummy here as well, but we want to have empty, so let's have that. So on change, we have the event, and what we can do is set name is event dot target dot value, right? Event dot target dot value. So let's see if this works. So Soham, see, I'm typing Soham and it is becoming name equals to Soham. Now coming to your question, right? Let's do one more thing. Let's add a console.log statement here. Console.log here. Let's just add this, right? Let's see what happens. So maybe let's reload. Okay, we have everything empty. Let's come back to the console. Okay, let's type something. See, here is called every time we are changing something. So that means every time the state is changed, it is actually executing this entire piece of code. So that's why we can keep this as const. It is not changing this declaration of name. Whenever the name is changing, whenever you are calling set name, this entire function is called again. So again, we have this statement executed. Const name set name is use state. So the current value of the state will be the event dot target. Whatever we have set here, that is SO. So we get the same that updated value now, right? We get the updated value now. So that's why it is working. We don't have to give it let, right? We don't have to give this a let. We can keep this as a const. Okay, that's about state, right? State is definitely, now you have understood what state is. So if you want to make some changes, if you want to make some updates, and you want to have your website rendered dynamically, like whenever this value is changing, you want to re-render your website or that component, you should use something called state. Okay, you should use something called state. Okay, let's talk about this thing, right? Let's actually create an application. We will create an application. What we'll create is this is a homework that I've already given to you earlier. Like if you remember, we had talked about creating a dynamic basket, right? Basket as in you will create a dynamic list of fruits and you can add fruits to it, you can remove fruits to it. React stores the use state variables internally. Yes, definitely, yes. React, that's why we have this use state, right? That's why we have this use state. It will be doing that state management on itself. It will store that current values and the updates, like whatever updates that you sent here, but it will call this entire thing again. So that's why it's like getting the new it's creating a new variable with the updated value. So it does store those things. Yes, it does store those things. Yes. Okay, is it clear with everyone? Is the concept of state clear with everyone? Let me know if it is clear with everyone. Okay, awesome, awesome. Let's now move into the second concept, that is props. Why do we need even props, right? Why do we need yes, chat application in React.js? If you have built the backend as well using WebSockets and those things, definitely it's a full stack project that you have built. Yes. So okay, let's now talk about what is props, right? What is props? Just see this thing, right? Generally, what did we talk about? Like we want components to be separate, right? Components should be independent entities that should have their own meaning. As in, this is kind of a counter functional. Let's give it a counter functional only. But again, like this doesn't make sense to actually mix everything. We might want to have button components somewhere. We should maybe treat the display components in a different component. We might want to keep the display component somewhere else, because the display component will be responsible for only working on how the display should be designed, whether it should be a large text, whether it should be colored, whether it should be doing this, that, these things, right? So it should take care of only the display part, right? We can just segregate this into two more components, right? Otherwise, like just imagine a large website, everything will come under the same component if we have to do things like this. So definitely we don't want to do things like this. What we want to do is we want to segregate the functionality into a display component. We want to create a new component. Let's create a new component, right? New file. Let's create a display component, display counter.js, right? We'll create a new file. So it will be a functional component again. Functional component again. Let's call it display counter. And it returns something, right? It will return something. So return how it will display. It will basically return how it should be displayed. So let's say we just return like this: counter is a counter, and the value of the counter will pass it somehow, right? So we don't want to display it like this. So let's get back to the counter application again. So const counter and set counter. is equals to use state 0. Again, like I'm just naming the variables like this because they make more sense. I could have used the name variable, but again, like counter doesn't storing a counter doesn't make sense with a name variable, so that's why I'm renaming, right? Okay, so we have, what I want to do here is I want to display the counter here like this using the display counter, right? Import display counter. So let's export this as well. So it should be exported, so we can add here like this, export default and function. So let's give export import display counter from display counter, right? So we can have this here, and we can have the button here, right? So button class name equals to btn, and let's have it a on click function. Let's give it a on click functionality. So on click is what? Set counter plus 1, right? This is the on click that we want to have, so let's give it add 1. Similarly, we'll have a second button called subtract 1, and we'll give it a counter -1. Okay, so we have this, right? We have this code. Now if you see, let's just run this. I'm not sure why is it not displayed, but let's just save everything. Okay, we have, right? Now if you see, it is not printing any value or not changing, right? How do we pass the value of this counter? So what we want to do is we want to pass this value of the counter down to this display counter component. We want to have this counter value in this display counter component. How do we do that? We have one more thing called props. Props are a way. So React also reacts to prop changes. So props are a way to pass data down in the component tree. If you want to pass some data, pass some state down into the component tree, you can use something called props, right? Not only state, you can pass additional data as well. Let's say you want to pass some other thing like message or something like that, you can use props, right? So how do we use props like this? Props is an object that is obtained in this functional component, so we'll write it as props like this. Props, it's an object that's received, and you can have like this props. Let's say the name is counter, right? So props.counter, you can just write it like this. For now it's undefined because it's not passed, so it will not show anything, but let's pass this data, right? So what we can do is how to pass props. Props are normal attributes, like similar to normal attributes that you pass in HTML or here as well, like class name button. This is actually a prop that you are passing. So similar to this, you will also pass props here. So what is the prop name? Counter equals to, and you pass in the value here of actual counter that you have. So this, what you are doing is basically counter is the prop that you are passing. This is different, right? Counter is a prop that you are passing. You are passing a prop or a property with the name of counter, and it has the value of this counter, whatever state it has, right? So you can pass values like this as well, and you can take it as an object here and print props.counter. So if you run this code now, okay, 1 second, let's just save everything. And if you see counter equals to 0, now if you add 1, see it is changing. If you subtract 1, it is changing. That means React not only reacts to state changes, right? Although it's a state here, yes, it's a state here, but React is not only reacting to state changes, it is also reacting to prop changes. And that kind of makes sense here, right? Why? Because see, this is a state, right? This is a state. Whenever you are changing the state, this entire thing is rendered again, right? So here in the prop, a new value will be passed. Altogether. So that's why it is also, this will be called with a new value, so this will also change, right? So React kind of reacts to prop changes as well. So you can, if you want to pass values down in the component tree, you can actually use something called props or properties. Now this code is not good because you have props like this. What we can do is we can go for destructuring again. We can just destructure whatever is needed. So we just want to have the counter value, so we can destructure it like this, counter, right? And we can directly write here counter like this, and that will also work. So again, if you see now, we can just go to this and do this functionality, right? So that is basically prop. So you can pass other details as well, not necessarily you have to pass states. Let's say you want to pass a message as well, right? So sorry, let's say you want to pass a message like this, message equals to, let's say, test message, right? You want to pass a message like this, so you can pass that as well. So here what you can do is counter is this. And okay, one more thing, you cannot, let's say you want to have another thing, let's say you want to have a span here with the message, right? With the message, so you can destructure the message property out as well. So message is something that you would need. You cannot pass both of, like, you cannot have both of them together. Each component should return one parent component. Each component should return one parent component. Here you are returning two. Let's say there is no way, obviously there is one way you can enclose them in a div tag. Let's say you don't want to enclose them in a div tag. What you can do is you can pass a blank component. How? Like this. This is a blank, you can enclose them under a blank component, blank parent component, right? Parent tag like this. This is a blank parent tag that we can specify, this and slash this. So if you, this will also work. You see this works actually. And here you will see that the message is also displayed, test message. React re-render all components when a particular state is changed when passed. No, it only re-renders the ones that are needed. Not only it re-renders, it also does a smart thing. It will re-render only the paths that are changing. It will not re-render everything. It will just re-render the paths that are changing. Like what it does here, although it re-renders this entire thing, whenever it is changing, whenever the state is changing, it will call this function again. Like whenever the state is changing, it acts as if it calls this function again, right? But whenever it calls this function again, it will not just re-render. It will create a local DOM, virtual DOM. It will create a local copy of the DOM. It will perform a diff operation with the existing part and see what are the parts that are changing, and it will just update them, right? It will just update the parts that are changing. It will not update everything. So yes, it will not update everything, right? Okay, we can actually check what are the parts it is updating, right? So we can go under this, because although it's not very simple always, because sometimes what you need to do is you need to have some keys that you have to set up, otherwise it actually does update everything. But let's actually check. So h1 we have, and we have this span, right? Let's check what are the things that are updating. So if you run here, just see this span is not at all updating. Just see this span is not at all updating. Is this span updating? This span is not at all updating. Although it is calling the function again, but this span is not at all updating. Just see the counter is only updating. Just see this, follow this, the counter is only updating, right? So it does a diff operation. It checks what are the things that needs to be updated, and only it updates that. Okay, so that's how React virtual DOM works. Okay, now let's take this a step higher, right? So what we are coming into is something called, we have done state, we have done props. What we are coming into now is something called unidirectional flow of data, right? But before that, let me know, is it clear with everyone? Whatever we have discussed till now, is it clear with everyone? Or do you have any doubts? Let me know. After that, we'll start with this. Let me know if it is clear with everyone. If you have any doubts, let me know. I'll definitely try to help you out. And if you don't have any doubts, let me know that it's clear with you. Clear, okay. It's clear with Kishan. Anyone else? Is it clear with everyone else? Just let me know. Clear, okay, awesome. If we want dynamic prop, like we have an array hi hello, and we want in some interval it will automatically change to the prop from array and render it. Yes, definitely. But you have to have this prop somewhere. You have to pass this somewhere, right? Or you have to maintain it as a state somewhere. Like how would you control the changing, right? How would you control the changing of the values, right? So you have to maintain it as a state somewhere. So whenever you maintain it as a state, whenever it updates, it will re-render everything. So the props will also change. It will be passed with the new props, and it will work, right? Okay, actually in this example, what we can do is we can actually take Once we learn about unidirectional flow of data, we'll do a small example actually to demonstrate whatever you were saying, right? Let's do a small example. We'll create that fruit basket that we talked about, a list of fruits, and we can dynamically add or delete from that fruit basket, right? Let's just do that as well. So unidirectional flow of data, what does it mean? Data flow in React is only one direction. That is, you can only pass data from the parent component to the child component. You cannot do it the other way around. Let's actually understand what does this mean with a problem that we might face. Okay, let's come back to this. Now we have separated this display text into a different component. But see, the button code is very similar, right? Only the functionality is different. Why are we creating two different buttons? We can segregate them in a single component, right? And just render two components. So let's do one thing. That is new file, and we'll create a button component, button.js, right? So it will be also a functional component, a function button, and it will return something. So it will return what it will return. We'll just copy the logic here, that this is the logic that it want to have here. So return this button, and let's do a export default. Okay, for now let's remove this on click functionality, right? We don't have this yet, so let's just remove this for now. Okay, we have this button, and we have to have here some text here, display text. So let's say we pass it as a prop. So display text, and we can take display text as a prop here. So display text, right? Here what we can do, we can add the button components. So let's just import the button component. Import, one second, I'll just look into your question. Just give me a second. Import button. Is it exported? Export default. Yes. Import button from /button, right? Import button from button. Okay. What we'll do here, we'll create a button component, right? We'll just create a button component, button, and we can pass in here the display text, right? We can just pass the prop display text to display whatever it should display. So display text will be add 1 for the first button. For the second button, we can have button, and display text will be subtract 1. What happens here? Okay, we have two buttons set up, right? We have two buttons set up, add 1, subtract 1. Now this is how we break it down into components. See, we have created a reusable component called button. This display text was changing, right? Two things were changing. One is the on-click functionality, one is the display text. So we just take it as a prop. And we just pass this prop as we need. Display text is add 1, so we just pass add 1. So it will be written, add 1 is written there. Display text is subtract 1, so we just pass this text, right? Now see, we have this, but again, this will not function. Okay, it will not function. Now the question arises to us. We had this state, right? We had this state here. We had this button here. Whenever we updated this state using set counter. Now the problem being, we have a button component. Where should we have the state? Should we have the state here? If we have the state here, how would we pass that state to the display component? Or if we have the state in display component, how will we pass it to the button component? That's the question. So that's where this logic actually comes in. Unidirectional flow of data. Data flow in React is unidirectional. It will only be passed from parent component to child component. So we cannot, button is not a child component for display counter. Neither display counter is the child component for button. What we should do ideally, is we should keep the state in their common parent or common ancestor, right? Let's say there are multiple ancestors before it's common, and we want the state to be like in both the places. We have to keep the state at a place which is a common ancestor, which is the lowest common ancestor to both of them, right? Generally it's the parent itself which is common to both of them, but there might be multiple ancestors. So the first common ancestor to both of them as we move upwards is where we should keep the state at. So what is the common ancestor to both button and display counter, it is this counter functional. It is where we have both of them together, right? So that is the common ancestor to both of them, or common the parent is common. So we should keep the state here. Now how do we pass the data? Obviously we can pass the data like this, counter is counter, but how do we update the data? We can also pass this function here. We not in the prop, not only we can pass values, we can also pass functions. So we can just pass a function, that is, we can pass a function, let's call it handle click. We can pass a function called handle click like this. Display text is add one. We can pass a function as prop as well. Handle click, what it should do, it will be a function that will do set counter is counter plus 1, right? Similarly, it's a display text, and we will have a handle click, and what it should do, it should be a function that should do set counter is counter minus 1. We can pass functions as props as well. So we have passed functions here, handle click here and handle click here. Now let's just take the prop here, handle click, and pass it as in the event listener. So on click is handle click, right? We'll just pass this. Now see what happens. We'll come back, add one, see it is changing, subtract one, it is changing, right? So what we have essentially done is we have passed a function that will be responsible for handling the change. Set counter is counter plus 1. Similarly here, set counter is counter minus 1. So whenever, see what happens, we have passed this function here. Now whenever we click this button, handle click is triggered. For the first button, what is the handle click? Handle click is calling set counter is counter plus 1. So it is adding 1 to the counter. It is updating the state. Second, for the second button, we are doing handle click is counter minus 1. We are setting it to counter minus 1. So whenever we click that button, it will trigger this function. It will trigger this function. That is, this function will indeed call set counter is counter minus 1. So that's why we are setting counter minus 1. So that's how we can actually pass it. We can have multiple components and they can still interact with each other. Not directly, but we can use pass functions or event handlers, or we can pass functions, and we can also pass states as well as props, right? So we have this setup. So that's why it is working. Is this clear? Let's take an example for this. Maybe let's take a better example. So what we'll do is we'll just forget about these parts, right? Let's forget about this counter application for now. We'll create a new application called fruit basket. Let's call this fruit basket fruit display .js. In fact, let's just create in one file itself, right? We can just create all the components in one file. That also we can do. So for now, although it's not a good practice, but we can do that as well. So let's just create a fruit basket.js, right? So we will add multiple components. So definitely there will be use state here. So use state from React. Let's just have this. Now let's create a function first that will display the fruits, right? That function, what will it do? It's a fruit display. Let's say fruit display. It will be responsible for displaying all the fruits, right? So we can pass it as a props here, the fruits. So fruits, we can pass it as a prop. It will be just responsible for displaying them, right? So we can have a div here, div, and let's give it some style. That style will be display flex, or not, flex is not needed. Yes, display flex is okay. Display flex and flex direction is column, and maybe a few more things like yeah, that should be enough actually. Let's add something like fruits are. Let's add the h1 fruits are slash h1, and then what we can do is we can actually render all the fruits that are there. So what we can do is we can do something like this, that fruits. Now each fruit, what we want to do, first of all, we want to have an unordered list. Definitely we want to have an unordered list. So let's have a unordered list here. All the fruits will be displayed like this /ul. Now see, this will also be interesting. Okay, we have an unordered list that will contain all the fruits, right? We want to display all the fruits. How? So what should happen here? It should happen something like this, that inside this unordered list, all the fruits should come up like this, that li apple, like this. All the fruits should come in one by one. So basically what we can do is we can do something. Just remember about the arrow functions, right? Or remember about the array function, sorry. Map. So fruits dot map, we will map each of the fruit. We will map each of the fruit to what? Li and the fruit name, right? Li and the fruit name. So we'll map all the fruits to li and the fruit name, right? So function, let's create a fruit basket. This will be responsible for everything. So it will have a fruit state. Definitely it will have a fruit state, fruits, and set fruits, right? Set fruits equals to use state. What is the initial thing? Initial will be list. It will be an empty list, right? So return, what it should return? It should return div. Okay, let's just focus on add fruits for now. It should return div with what? It should return div with some styles. Like style will be definitely display. We can just copy these two properties. We just want these two properties to be there. So display flex and flex direction column. And here what we can do is we can pass in the fruits basket, we can pass in this array, right? We can just call this component fruit display, and yes, that will work actually. And here we pass the fruits to be equals to fruits, this state, right? And let's just export this, export default and fruit basket. Okay, we'll just export this. We'll come to app.js. Instead of this, we don't want this counter anymore. We just want our fruit basket. So import fruit basket from fruit basket, right? So we'll just pass it here, fruit basket, and let's see what has happened. So fruits are it's the empty list. That's totally like understandable. It's the empty list right now. What we'll do is we'll add some initial values to this. Let's say apple and mango. We want apple and mango to be there in the fruit basket initially. So let's go. So we have fruits are, and we have apple and mango. So they're getting displayed as well, right? They're getting displayed. What I want to do now is I want to add the functionality of removing, adding fruits, right? So function, let's create a component. Is it required? Not necessarily. You can even like pass an undefined value, but again, like it's always better that you define what is the type of data that you are storing. So for empty list, you can actually pass in an empty array, but definitely you can pass an empty like complete. You can completely make it a you can pass nothing indeed. Like you can do this as well. That will also work. But generally, it's a good idea to pass whatever type of data you are storing, the initial value for that. Okay. So function, what we want to do here is we want to do add fruit component, right? Add fruit component. We can actually break the add fruit component into multiple components, but for the sake of time, let's just not do that, right? So it will add a fruit. It will be responsible for adding a fruit, right? So what it will contain? It will contain. So we will not give a div tag here. It will contain what? It will contain an input first. Input, and it will contain a button, right? It will contain a button, and it will call add fruit. Button will be add fruit, right? In the input, you will write whatever fruit you want to add, and when you click the button, that fruit will be added, right? So definitely when you have an input, let's just add this component as well, add fruit, right? So add fruit. So let's just see. So add fruit, we have this, and we have the button as well. Let's give it a class of button, maybe. Button class will be button. Class name is button. So we have this add fruit, right? We have the input and we have this add fruit. So whenever we write a fruit here and click on add fruit, that fruit will be added to our list. So what we can do is, first we should definitely have a state that will get the value for this, that will contain the value whenever this is changed, right? So const fruit name, state fruit name equals to use state, and will pass, initially keep it empty, right? So the value for this will be equals to the fruit name that we have right now, fruit name, and on change it will take in an event, and it will make, so we are making a controlled component. So what is this called? Whenever you are controlling the value of an element and you are also adding a on change event listener, you are basically creating a controlled component. You are controlling the value of the component. So set fruit name is event dot target dot value. Indeed, you can actually just remove this as well, this value as well, because then also it will work. But let's just keep this, right? Let's just keep this. Let's just control it. So what you want to do is, whenever this add fruit is clicked, you want to add this fruit to this fruit list. So what you should pass here is, you should pass here, what you should pass here is a handle click. What should happen when you do a handle click, right? What should happen when you do a handle click? So in the handle click, you will have a method, you will call a method where it will take in a fruit as argument. It will take the fruit name as argument, and it will add this to the state. So what you can do is set fruits. It is adding to the list, right? So what should be the updated value of the fruits? Whatever fruits we have till now, that should be added first. Whatever fruits we have now, that should be added. With that, we will add our new fruit to the list as well. So that is what should happen whenever you click on the button, and it should actually pass the fruit as well, right? So let's do that. So here we have passed in this prop, right? Handle click. So where have we passed this? Okay, we have passed it here. We should pass in it in handle fruit change. Okay, we should not pass it here, rather we should pass it here, right? Handle fruit. So we are doing this. So here we can take this handle click, right? And we can add an event listener here that on click. Now we just don't pass handle click, because then on click will be triggering it with the event it has. It will not trigger it with the fruit name, right? So what we should do is, we should pass a different function here altogether to handle on click, but we will call in that function handle click ourselves with the fruit name that we have. So fruit name, right? So that is how we call. Now let's see if this is working. So we have saved this. Okay, add fruits. Let's say, let's add mango. So we'll click on add fruit. It is adding mango. Let's add guava. So let's click on add fruit. It is adding guava. Let's add let's say watermelon, right? Watermelon. If we click on add fruit, it is what adding watermelon. So this is how we can create a simple fruit basket. I think it makes, does it make sense? Like, I have gone a bit fast, I understand, but let me know if it makes sense to you. Let me know if this is clear to you. Like, how is this working? This entire thing. Like, this is a proper example I feel that you can have on states and props, like how exactly you should do. Like, and in fact, this is not the best code. Like, you should in fact separate these out into two components as well. So maybe what you can do is, you can maybe add a functionality to remove a fruit as well. Like, you can try doing that as well. And challenge will be, the challenge part will be like, beside this mango, there should be a cross button on which if you click, it will get removed. Right. So that will be the challenge problem. One way you can do, like, definitely one way you can do remove fruit is adding another, let's say another list where you can write a fruit name and it will be removed. But again, like, you can add this as a challenge problem, that whenever you have a cross button beside each of them, whenever you click on the cross button, it will get removed, right? Or a delete but icon maybe. So we can add another fruits as well, other fruits as well, like let's say pineapple. So we can just add this and it will get added. Is it clear with everyone? How is this working? Let me know in the chat. Is it clear with everyone? How is this working? If it's clear, write in the chat that yes, it is clear with me. Clear. Okay, awesome. Yes, so I'll push this code into GitHub and I'll share the link on Telegram, right? You can definitely try to modify on top of this. Yes, it is creating, it is replacing this list with a new list. It is replacing this list with a new list, right? Actually, let's look into what happens in inspect. Like that might be interesting as well. So what we'll do is we'll go into div. We'll go into the list, like directly we'll go into the list. So div display, let's have this, and we have this UL and li items, right? Okay, so let's say we are adding a item to the list. So how can we do this? Let's just add one more item. Let's say papaya, right? So click on add fruit. See, a new item is added. Only a new item is added. Although we are updating the list entirely, only a new item got added. Just see this again. Any fruit, lychee. Just see a new item gets added. It's not updating everything. Although we are creating a new list every time, we are updating the entire list every time, but only an item is getting added, right? Because that is the only change that it needs to do. It doesn't need to change the existing elements. So that's why I said, like, I took the shopping cart example, right? Because these things are not actually changing. But when you actually delete, that will be a challenge, right? When you actually delete an item, you will actually see what are the items that are changing. So just take this as an homework. What happens when you delete, or otherwise we'll discuss this. Obviously we'll discuss this tomorrow, what happens when we delete. But yeah, like, that will be interesting to see. Cool. That's all I wanted to cover today. I think it's clear to you, like, what is the idea of state, what is the idea of props, and how can we, what is unidirectional flow of data, and how can we actually create multiple components and still have them interact with each other. Like, we pass states, we pass handlers, or functions, and then we actually, like, make them interact with each other, right? Okay, so yep, that's all. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. So whenever you are adding a fruit, all the functions are executed and only fruit basket part is being re-rendered. Yes, not only fruit basket part, sorry, not only fruit basket part, only this part that is changing. This add fruit, when this new fruit is added, only this part is getting changed. The existing fruits are not getting updated, right? The existing fruits that are there, although it's re-rendered, but only this new fruit that is added, only that's getting re-rendered, right? Okay, yes. So make sure you subscribe and you like. If you have liked this stream, make sure you like and also share it with your friends if you think that it might help them, and you can, yeah, like, definitely do that. All right, so I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow also we have a class in this, in which we'll discuss about what are life cycle methods, and we'll continue with this. We'll actually look into delete as well, and how delete actually works, and how, what are the changes, what are the DOM changes that are happening actually. So yeah, we'll look into that, and definitely, like, join tomorrow as well. I think the time is same, 7:30 p.m. Join tomorrow. We'll talk about lifecycle methods and deletes as well. Cool. Thanks for joining, and have a good night.